testing?
Well, I have to say, listening to the breadth of the content provided by Willi and crammed into a very short period of time, I feel like the man who was dying of thirst found a fire hydrant and walked up to the fire hydrant, turned the controller switch on the fire hydrant and tried to get a drink of water. So the first question, and by the way, we'll definitely leave time for folks in the community here to ask additional questions. But because we had so much material provided in such an intense and short period of time, I want to give Willi a chance to answer what I consider is the key question here. We got a lot of material on how we're addressing the problem. But if you were standing on one foot, okay, standing on one foot, and your sense of balance wasn't great, and you were asked, how would you precisely define the core problem in finance? What would your answer be?
Yeah, it's how financial...
You have the microphone.
Yeah, I have it here. How financial contracts are presented. The paper form of lawyers is really non-suitable for the core of it. There is other things around it. But the paper form is absolutely unsuitable. And it's an algorithm, and it should be represented as an algorithm right from beginning.
Well, then what I would interpret your answer to be, in effect, what's needed is a hybrid contract where cash flow obligations are represented in the contract by both the contract terms and the algorithms and the legal issues that are never precise or contingent are the types of things that should be included in natural language.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to say it.
When you look at, in fact, most of the discussion in the prior hour, it's centered around the legacy world. And this, by the way, is the problem both in the practice of finance in the legacy world and in the regulation of finance in the legacy world. Based on this kind of presentation and based on the discussion from yesterday, we have a pretty good handle on the fact that the data that regulators collect now is not fit for purpose. Static, backwards looking, aggregated, you can add lots of other negative attributes associated with it. And so the kind of solution that you're proposing, I think applies both to the practice of finance and to the regulation of finance. But if we move on to Ralf, the question I wanted to ask you was, we spent a lot of time talking about the legacy world, but what does this content with respect to the description of what finance is all about, what does it add and how does it affect and transform the world that involves DeFi and blockchain and tokenization and all the issues associated with the emerging type of finance that's taking place?
Yeah, so my answer to that would be the biggest problem is that people do not think in, so when we talk about tokenization, people do not think in balance sheet terms. You really have to think in balance sheet terms what you're tokenizing. And once you start to think in balance sheet terms, it becomes much clearer what you're tokenizing. So in the case of financial instruments, as we saw, there are financial contracts at the heart, and then you tokenize a financial contract, right? You're not tokenizing a bond in its form. I mean, the problem is that currently the industry is what Willi mentioned, is replicating the problems in the legacy world onto these new rails, right? So I call it they're producing stupid tokens. So they're issuing a token, they put a PDF of the contract into the token and they call it a bond token. This will not scale. So this is a big problem. So that is one. The other aspect I would say is not really short because I want to take questions. Is that DeFi and TradFi, as this new terminology is, still has finance at the core. It's still finance. It doesn't change. So I think the key is really what are we tokenizing, and maybe we can talk about agentic finance in a second afterwards too. But,
maybe if I may add something here. If you look at what the blockchains are handling, actually current accounts, like the beginning of computers, because that's easy. I give you $1, you have 1 plus, I have 1 minus. Done. Not even interest calculation, nothing. It's very easy to solve. A financial contract is a stream of payments. It's a different story. Yeah, just wanted to add. And that is really missing in the new technologies.
Matt, for those of you who don't know, Matt is intimately involved with the Casper Association. He's the CEO, and Casper, of course, is one of the innovative blockchain approaches. And so the question I want to ask you, because you're involved in leading the way in one of the applications and one of the institutions of the new DeFi world, is DeFi going to perpetuate the problems that we're finding in the legacy world and legacy regulation, or is DeFi in fact going to solve those problems?
Thanks, Allan. That's a great question. May sound as a surprise coming from the DLT industry, but I really view DeFi as more of a sandbox where you can test new innovations uninhibited by legacy architecture. So I don't think that the real question here is whether DeFi is the panacea, is going to solve everything or carry on the legacy stuff. I think that the real question here is, what do we do as builders, right? Are we going to acknowledge and address the known deficiencies of, inefficiency, opacity, fragility, or are we going to carry the baggage with us from the past? And I think the opportunities are quite clear, right? As Willi, Ralf, et cetera, kind of pointed out, right? At the end of the day, we have the opportunity to have faster settlement, fewer errors, and far greater transparency, and everybody wins as a result. But none of that's guaranteed, and I think it's important to step back and recognize that however deficient our current systems are, they function and achieve market objectives, right? So I think that's why I believe that the real path forward is not in payments, right? So I do see stablecoins as the largest near-term growth in the market, right? But I think that the real breakthrough comes from building truly smart financial contracts, right? Instead of dumb tokens, as Ralf likes to point out. And I really like that. I think that's important. And if we get it right, then we get predictable obligations, right? Eliminate surprises, and we get kind of away from the unintended complexities that took down things like LTCM, like you mentioned the other day, right?
Can I add something to that?
Please do.
So I think the reason why people flock to these new environments is because they would like to solve a persistent problem, and the persistent problem is capital efficiency. This is a big problem, right? And then people think, they look at these new technologies and say, yeah, I can just build an app, I can fractionalize something, and then I've solved this capital efficiency problem. But you haven't, because you haven't started from a first principle, which is our thesis here. First principle is ACTUS. So you have to start from a first principle basis in order to create a more efficient, more automated, higher fidelity, more reliability, and certainly higher degree of automation environment. So that's our thesis here. That's all our thesis, and it's frustrating to see that you have so much money flowing into things that we know are not going to work, right? So securitization on the blockchain, it's just not going to work, because when you securitize, as we learned in the financial crisis, you really need to have a profound understanding with a very high degree of automation, what is inside the things that you're securitizing, what are the future promises, etc. That is nowhere to be found in any of these projects, which get funded by hundreds of millions of dollars from VCs. Right? So,
yeah, absolutely. And digital assets are not new, right, Ralf?
All financial assets are digital already. I mean, it's like
so if you don't make them programmatic in nature, I don't know what true advantage you're getting out of tokenizing an asset.
You have to
you have
take
to
It should.
also-
Sorry.
Okay.
I hope everyone heard
Maybe
that.
I may add here, something came to my mind. You know, probably most of you have seen, what's the film, Big Short. I guess almost everybody has seen that. And there is this one quote, you know, where this crazy guy, you know, with his drumsticks.
Michael Burry.
Yeah, where he said, you know, I want to know everything about the 10 best or the richest CDOs or something like that.
MBS, really.
Oh, MBS. And then the guy said, "Oh, you want to see?" No, and he said, "I want to see every detail." So he gets that kind of paper, you know, and he goes through, and then he goes and checks. That's an additional thing. That one we wouldn't solve even, but we will make it much simpler to see what is inside.
When you look at what's going on in the world today, there are always these waves of flavor of the month. Some new innovation, some new idea, and then lots of folks out there in the business world think they can make a quick buck doing it, and they glom onto it. And the flavor of the month right now is AI, and I want to be careful because I think there's a lot more in AI than simply puffery and flavor of the month type of reactions, primarily because anyone who's worked with it has seen over a very short period of time the most significant improvements that are ongoing, and the power of AI keeps getting stronger and the value keeps getting greater. But when we talk about a application of AI to address a specific problem, and in our case, from the problems we face in finance, despite all the money being invested and all the resources and all the commitment and the human talent being applied, is AI going to make a major contribution to solving the problems in finance that we've been talking about? Where does AI fit into it, and how can we make sure that it's used to benefit improvements in the efficiency and operations and transparency of finance?
So first, okay, fine. So we have a thesis, obviously. So we have this thesis that if you want to build more efficient systems, you have to start with the algorithmic, contract-centric system. So we believe that, certainly I believe, and I'm convinced that you need to have a clear separation between probabilistic problem spaces and deterministic problem spaces, which is what Willi explained. So assume that everything will be run by agents in the future, which I'm pretty sure that's going to happen. It's probably more clear that agents will take over a lot of our functions than tokenization. That's a different story, but I think agents will take over soon. So then these agents need to negotiate, lifecycle manage, analyze, risk manage financial contracts. And if these agents do not have an understanding, a deterministic understanding of what has been negotiated, what needs to be negotiated, and if they don't have an understanding of what kind of risk factors influence the financial terms, the deterministic terms, then that in the end are going to be agreed to and adhered to, this will just not work, right? So that's one aspect. And the other aspect is that AI has great value in updating financial systems, right, to more reliable operating environments, no doubt, right? So if you're operating on Java 5, but Java is now, I don't know, I'm not a techie, 18 or so release, right? Oh, so you're going to do that with 2 people with 2 man years instead of 200 people in 2,000 man years, right? So that has great value for the overall system, but it doesn't help you solve the foundational first problem, which is you do not have a unified language of the system that you're updating, right? So at some point, you'll have to recognize. Also, try to get a probabilistic agent to understand a deterministic system. They're pretty bad at that,
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, look, like I still remember being in the wave while I was a young auditor at Deloitte, and who knows RPA, right? Robotic process automation. And it was not really adopted, right? Because the margin of error is just too great, does not work in finance. And I think that we're at that kind of tipping point where we actually are going to be able to start to do that, probably vis-a-vis agents, like Ralf pointed out. And I think that one of the real opportunities now is to use AI to help enforce standards and transparency at scale. So that's kind of my perspective, and we're at a tipping point. AI is further than we think, but behind more than we think at the same time. So it's kind of a fuzzy area for me.
Shall we take some questions? Really,
there was a lot of information provided in the past hour and so, and you've all been very patient. And I was going to ask if there are folks in the audience who'd like to ask a question.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Ladies first.
First,
Ladies first. We are
first.
gentlemen still.
It's seeing clearly who raised their hand is a little hard because the lights are glaring at us and blinding us. So please don't feel insulted if somehow we missed you. Maybe in addition to waving your hand, you might want to stand up if we haven't been able to see it. But go ahead.
Okay, so I would like an example of what you mean. Like, take two transactions. What is being recorded about those two transactions and how?
Let's take, we always had the two examples here, principal at maturity and annuity. So it's a stream of transactions. There are many payments. Take the annuity and think about the mortgage. So we have a date where we agree on the contract. We call that contract deal date. Then we have an initial exchange date. That's when the payment flows here. There we have an amount of what you owe us. Then we have cycles of multiple cycles. Well, keep to the simples, you go straight into amortization. So we have an amortization cycle and we have a termination date here. Let's say 20 years. And you pay monthly. Say, and then we have a rate. Given that, we can calculate your amount monthly payment. So the system will return the monthly payment, and we say you have to pay so and so long. That's for a fixed 20-year annuity. The simplest. There are many variants then with grace period, with fixed, variable, cap, floor, and so on. So it becomes it can become complex. But that was a good explanation.
Yeah, but you're talking about unique identifiers of agents and transactions. Here, what am I assigning unique identifiers?
Okay, now the age. The artists, the people that.
The unique identifiers. Really. Who are the counterparties?
For every financial contract, there are two counterparties. Every asset is a liability to somebody else. So every contract points then actually use the LEI. To two counterparties, which can be groups, can be single people or can be multiple people behind. So that's where ACTUS stops. So if you do credit risk analysis, then you group by counterparty. And you look at the collaterals of the counterparty, you look at the gross exposure, net exposure, loss given default, all of these things. Once you have that data, you can do that.
I was going to say, one of the most difficult things, I think, in sort of getting someone who's newly exposed to ACTUS and what we're trying to say, is that the financial world is organized around products. Mortgages are a key center in a certain part of the business. Car loans are another. Leases for heavy equipment are another. And what distinguishes ACTUS from sort of this traditional world of finance is that ACTUS is not centered around products per se. If it were, the task of standardizing the financial contracts would be unachievable. What we're doing is we're focusing on one aspect of a financial contract, and that is the contractual cash flow obligations. And because we focus on the cash flow, we're able to compress the world of finance into a very small number of manageable cash flow algorithms, because one cash flow algorithm represents a large number, or can represent a large number of traditional financial products. And it's important to keep that in mind. So when Willi was talking about the the algorithm we called annuity. It's not called an annuity because it represents something you can walk into a bank and buy and for the rest of your life collect a certain defined payment from the contract. It refers to a cash flow type, a cash flow algorithm in which there is a stream of payments. Some of them are interest. The payment consists of some interest and some principal, and the pattern over time of what happens to the interest and the principal is common to self-amortizing mortgages and, say, life annuities. And it's important to keep that in mind.
We have like 3 more questions. So the
Yeah.
gentleman, first the gentleman.
He was first, Svi was second, third up there.
Well, hang on.
All right, great.
You were first over
I
here.
start my question with one word, which is humility. So I think your organization needs somebody to embody humility. You're all gung-ho, you're very excited. That's a very noble thing. But imagine this deterministic process of translating a contract to cash flow. For certain type of cash flows has a flow in it. And then the financial system of a bunch of greedy actors will find that flow and exploit it in a very large extent. So as a result, because if you achieve your dream and you make ACTUS the standard, there's got to be a humility built into the system to constantly be vigilant that this deterministic transcription may have errors into it. And there's got to be a constant vigilance around that because that exposes a gigantic systemic flaw into the entire system. So currently you're not yet adopting it, and gung-ho enthusiasm is very healthy, but I think somebody's got to embody humility into it.
I think anything related to programming involves a risk of a programming error. And part of our process is the further extension of our test suite to make sure we get exactly what we believe we're getting in the way of cash flows, and constantly assuring, in fact, that we've identified as many of the potential programming errors in the reference implementation to make sure we don't have this problem. But I have to say, quite honestly, obviously we view ACTUS as something of great value. And in my life, it never occurred to me that it would be so difficult to give away for free something of great value. And so our enthusiasm is related to the fact that if we're not enthusiastic about it, we're not going to get anywhere. You know, our mantra is enthusiasm radiates enthusiasm. If we're excited about it, we hope we can get you excited about it. Not because we're perfect, but because we have something of great value that can make a material contribution to the transparency, the reliability, the operation, and a whole host of other aspects around finance.
That was.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, though. I really appreciate that. I think next to authenticity, humility is one of like my most coveted character traits. I know we have a question in the back.
Oh, that Svi was
Oh,
next.
here first? Okay, sorry.
Following the example you gave with the mortgage, assume the mortgage has a variable interest rates and you have to project the cash flow. If you don't know what the underlying interest rate is going to be, who enters the assumption, the underlying interest rate? And the second part, you probably also have some information in your contract on the value of the underlying of the house. How do you update it? How do you project it?
Okay. First of all, you make the forecast. Let's say you sell a variable mortgage. I can give you a little routine where I say, tell me what you think the future is, then you generate. Then you do another one, and you would, in front of a customer, you say, in this scenario it's that, in this scenario it's that. That's as much as we can say, not more. Then to the mortgage, as you saw on the right side of the tree, there are the credit enhancement. And there are the collaterals and the guarantees, so it's a collateral. So that's a contract which combines 2 contracts, the mortgage and the house. The house is modeled as commodity. We have the contract type. So everything is then again modeled as contract type, you know, and the house is then linked to a housing index. And again, it's you who forecasts the housing index, not us. Okay? Good.
Svi, I'd add one other thing, and that is when we talk about ACTUS representing certainty, In the case of a fixed rate interest rate instrument, the certainty reveals itself at the initiation of the contract with respect to exactly what the future payments will be. If you're dealing with an instrument with a variable interest rate, you can't know the future, obviously, with certainty. But what you do get out of the contract, the measure of certainty that you get is you know exactly how the payment's going to be computed when the interest rate changes. You have a market object that you have to, go to establish at some point in the future exactly what the payment's going to be. But the contract establishes absolutely without any ambiguity how the payment will be computed.
One last.
Over there, the last.
Can you maybe elaborate a bit on your go-to-market playbook? So how do you want to convince or bring the financial community to converge to your standard?
That's a great question, and I think you need a series of Trojan horses. I think there's two that are obvious that Willi mentioned before he came into the room. One is ISO, so vis-a-vis ISO international standards. And the other, the pivot points that all money center banks go through, such as DTC, right? So when the CTO of DTC is very adamant about this will work, it's probably in our roadmap more like the next 24 to 36 months, but it represents 15 to 25% of the solution that we're trying to implement in our greater kind of progress. I think these are the vehicles that get you to go to market.
I have one other crazy thought. There will be a time when no one wants to work in insurance companies and banks, right? Because your students and your children are not willing to put up with this terrible, terrible infrastructure that exists in these banks, right? They cannot hire people. They cannot. I mean, they can, but cost a lot of money. And at some point, people are not willing to work in these terrible application environments. And at some point, somebody will say this needs to be done better, more efficient, higher degree of automation, not all these reconciliation nightmares. I mean, I don't know who here has ever visited a mid-office and back-office, environment in banks. They all hate their jobs. They all hate it. Everybody hates it. So at some point, there will be, there must come a turning point. Hopefully it's still in my lifetime. It's uncertain, right? But where people recognize that we need a TCP/IP protocol, we need a periodic system to understand what we're doing here and really start from a first principle basis.
Add one thing. I think there's a bit to learn from an emerging, actually, strand of literature that is looking into business ecosystem innovation, ecosystem building. In particular, the mechanisms that you would like to use to align the different interests of different parties. Something I'm looking at quite a lot, trying to.
It's an interesting question how standards permeate like ecosystems, right?
Yeah, another thing is you should become messengers of that standard.
Yeah, the last thing I hate to do is cut off Q&A, primarily because it's always, from my perspective, the most interesting part of a presentation, because we get to benefit from your insights and the perspectives that you bring. Unfortunately, we've run over so far already over 5 minutes from our slot, and the folks who lay claim to this venue are taking over. But Ralf, Matt, Willi, me, we're all around through the conference, and grab us in the hallway, grab us during breaks, and we'd really love to get additional input from you. Thank you to the panel, great set
Thank
of
you,
folks,
Allan.
and thank you to
Thank you, everyone, for sitting through.